Have you ever wondered what would happen if a powerful millionaire gave up everything just to keep a promise he made to a scared little girl? Stay with me because this story will break your heart, challenge what you believe about success, and leave you seeing the world and yourself in a whole new light. Dear friend, what you're about to experience is not just a story. It's a deeply human journey about loss, resilience, and the quiet, unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this is your first time here, I invite you to drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your voice. And if you're someone who believes in second chances, in the hidden strength of ordinary people, and in stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing and tapping the bell icon. We share moments that matter. Thank you for being part of this one. Now, let's begin. Jonathan Blake had always believed that precision was the backbone of success. To the outside world, he was the image of perfection, immaculate gray suit, silver cufflinks that caught the morning sun just so, and a pair of polished black shoes that clicked like a metronome down the endless marble hallways of St. Jude Medical Center in Chicago. The man was a fortress of discipline. People said he could walk into a boardroom and silence a dozen high-powered executives with a single glance. But no one saw the cost. No one saw the hollow space behind his eyes when he stood alone in his penthouse each night, where the only sound was the faint hum of the city below. He wasn't just the CEO of the hospital. He was the man who had transformed St. Jude's into one of the nation's most profitable medical centers, a towering glass symbol of efficiency and innovation. But if you asked Jonathan what it all meant to him, he would pause. And in that pause, you might sense something fragile beneath all that polish. That was the part of him he kept hidden even from himself. Every morning started the same. 5:00 a.m. sharp. Black coffee, no cream, no sugar. Review of overnight reports on patient flow, operating costs, and donor pledges. A brisk workout on the treadmill overlooking Lake Michigan. At 6:30, his driver waited to take him to the hospital, though most mornings Jonathan preferred to drive himself. Control was everything. The leather steering wheel beneath his hands, the smooth hum of the engine, it reminded him that for now, the world still bent to his will. That morning had begun no differently. By 7:00 a.m., he was already in his corner office on the top floor, glancing at the skyline while his assistant, a nervous young man named Paul, quietly placed a folder on his desk. Jonathan didn't look up. He didn't need to. Paul had been trained to be invisible. That's how Jonathan liked it. No interruptions, no noise, no surprises. But then Paul hesitated. It was subtle, just a beat too long. Jonathan's eyes lifted sharp and expectant. Paul swallowed his Adam's apple, bobbing visibly. "I'm sorry, sir. I know your time is valuable." Paul began, his voice tight. "But I thought you should know. Mrs. Clara Jenkins hasn't reported for her shift again. 3rd day in a row." Jonathan stilled. Clara Jenkins. The janitor assigned to the executive wing. A woman Jonathan couldn't have picked out of a lineup. Her name existed in his mind only as a line item on a payroll sheet, a symbol of order maintained without his notice. Now that symbol had failed him. She didn't call in. Jonathan asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "No, sir." For a moment, the silence in the room was louder than the hum of the city outside. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Absence, without explanation, was a breach, small perhaps, but unacceptable. In a world where lives depended on precision and accountability, there was no room for leniency. "Contact HR," Jonathan said at last. "Prepare termination paperwork," but as Paul turned to go, something stopped Jonathan cold. His eyes drifted to the window where the city sprawled in the morning haze, millions of lives, each messy and unpredictable, so unlike the controlled world he tried to build. A memory surfaced, unbidden, his own mother years ago, working double shifts at a diner to keep food on their table after his father left. He had sworn he would never be powerless like that again. And yet, here he was, ready to erase a woman's livelihood without so much as asking why. "Wait," he said quietly. Paul froze mid-step. "Give me her number. I'll call her myself." Paul's eyes widened. In 5 years, he had never seen Jonathan make a call like that. Jonathan ignored his assistant's surprise. His fingers closed around the slip of paper with the number on it. He stared at it for a long moment, as if the neat digits held a key to something he couldn't name. Outside, the sky over Chicago was the color of steel. The city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next. And inside that glass tower, a man known for his unshakable certainty felt the first stirrings of doubt. The phone felt heavier than usual as he lifted it. His thumb hovered over the keypad. This wasn't part of the plan. But something, maybe the ghost of his mother's weary smile, maybe the faint crack in his own armor, made him press the numbers anyway. Jonathan Blake had built an empire on his ability to predict outcomes, to control every variable. But what he didn't know yet was that the moment the line connected, the world he had so carefully constructed would begin to unravel. And it would all start with a voice so small, so fragile, that it would shake him to his core. Before we move forward, take a moment to ask yourself, what would you have done in his place? Would you have made that call? Would you have cared enough to ask? Because sometimes the smallest choice can lead to the biggest change. Now, let's see what happened when that call was answered, not by the woman he expected, but by the voice that would change everything. Jonathan's thumb trembled slightly as he pressed the final digit of Clara's phone number. He held the receiver to his ear, waiting for the ringtone. His eyes, usually sharp and focused, darted to the city skyline beyond the window, as if searching for something steady to cling to. 1 ring, 2, 3. His mind rehearsed the words he would use: firm, precise, decisive. This was a simple call, he told himself, just a conversation to set expectations straight. The seconds felt like hours. On the 4th ring, the line clicked. But instead of the weary voice of a woman accustomed to night shifts and harsh chemicals, he heard something that stopped his breath. "Hello?" It was a child's voice, thin, uncertain, barely louder than a whisper. For the first time in years, Jonathan's composure shattered. His practiced reprimands evaporated like mist under a rising sun. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a hoarse, "Who? Who am I speaking to?" There was a soft rustling on the other end, like a phone being shifted between small hands. Then, with heartbreaking earnestness, the voice replied, "My name is Ella." "Mommy can't talk right now." Jonathan closed his eyes, pressing his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose, as if the pressure could stop the wave of emotion rising inside him. Ella. He could almost see her, frail, worried, standing on tiptoe to reach the phone, tiny fingers wrapped around the receiver. He forced himself to take a deep breath. "Ella," he said more gently than he intended, his voice cracking on her name, "is your mother? Is Clara okay?" There was silence, a silence so heavy it felt like it might crush him. Then Ella's voice broke through trembling. "She's very sick. She can't get out of bed. I tried to make her soup, but I burned it. I'm sorry." Jonathan's hand shook visibly now. He sank back into his leather chair, feeling the cold reality seep into his bones. The polished office, the expensive suit, the endless graphs of efficiency and revenue, none of it mattered at this moment. A little girl was apologizing for failing to take care of her mother, as if any of this was her fault. He thought of his own childhood, of nights spent lying awake, listening to his mother cough in the next room, praying she'd be able to work the next day so they could eat. The memories hit him like a blow to the chest, raw and unbidden. He swallowed hard. "No, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice unsteady. "You don't need to be sorry. You've been very brave." There was another pause, longer this time. He could hear Ella's breath hitching like she was trying not to cry. When she spoke again, her words were so innocent and heartbreaking, they carved through every last defense he had built around himself. "Mommy said she has to work, or we won't have a home. I can come instead if you need someone to clean. I'm good at picking up my toys." Jonathan felt tears prick his eyes, hot and unfamiliar. He blinked them away, ashamed to feel so vulnerable in his own office. But there was no stopping the flood of emotions now. He gripped the edge of his desk, grounding himself as he tried to keep his voice steady. "No, Ella," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "You don't have to worry about cleaning. I promise you, everything's going to be okay." He hated how hollow it sounded, knowing he couldn't guarantee anything yet. But he also knew he had to say it had to give her something to hold on to. He could hear a soft sob on the line, and it tore at him in a way that quarterly losses or market fluctuations never could. The weight of the moment settled heavily on his shoulders. Here was a child, left alone with a sick mother, clinging to the only thing she had left, the hope that if she worked hard enough, everything might be okay. It was a hope he recognized all too well, a hope he himself had once carried like a shield. He realized with a kind of terrifying clarity that if he hung up now, he would be choosing to return to the safety of his routines, the familiar numbness of his controlled world. But if he stayed, if he listened, if he acted, he would be stepping into the messy, uncertain, painfully human reality he had spent decades avoiding. A quiet voice inside him told him he couldn't walk away. He wouldn't. He had to know more. "Ella," he said, his voice low, "is there someone there who can help you? A neighbor? A friend?" She sniffled. "No. Mommy didn't want anyone to know she was sick. She said it would be bad if people found out." Jonathan's heart twisted. He could hear the quiet resignation in her voice, the sense of burden far too heavy for such small shoulders. In that moment, he wasn't a millionaire executive or a powerful CEO. He was just a man speaking to a child who needed someone to care. He knew he had to do something. He couldn't send someone else, couldn't delegate this like he would any other problem. He needed to see with his own eyes what Ella was facing. Needed to understand how he could help. "I'm coming to see you, Ella," he said quietly with a conviction that surprised even him. "I'll be there very soon." There was a tiny gasp on the other end of the line. "Really, really," he promised, and felt something inside him shift irrevocably. As he hung up, he stood slowly, his hands braced on his desk. For the first time in years, his day's schedule, meticulously planned and polished, meant nothing to him. All that mattered was a little girl's voice and the promise he had just made. Jonathan descended the gleaming marble steps of St. Jude Medical Center with a resolve he had never felt before. His driver was already waiting by the curb, but he waved him off, stepping into the chill Chicago air alone. The sky was a dull, heavy gray clouds sagging low over the city like a warning. He slipped into his own car, the leather interior cold against his back, and started the engine. The hum of the motor did nothing to calm his pounding heart. He knew the address from the hospital records, but he had never driven to this part of town. As he pulled out into the morning traffic, he couldn't shake the sense that every mile he covered was taking him deeper into a world he had spent his life avoiding. The route took him south past bustling intersections and quiet neighborhoods, giving way to boarded-up storefronts and crumbling brick buildings. Gone were the polished condos and gleaming office towers of downtown. Here the streets were cracked, lined with sagging power lines and graffiti-tagged walls. The deeper he drove into Englewood, the more foreign everything felt. Children's bikes lay abandoned on broken sidewalks. A stray dog darted between cars. Every block seemed to whisper stories of struggle and survival. He realized he'd never bothered to wonder what life looked like here, what dreams and heartbreaks unfolded in these narrow alleys. His thoughts were interrupted when a man stepped into the street a block ahead, holding up a hand to stop him. Jonathan's foot hit the brake hard. The man was tall, wearing a puffy jacket, eyes hard as stone. Two more figures appeared at his flanks, their movements deliberate eyes trained on Jonathan's luxury car. His pulse roared in his ears as he locked the doors, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. This wasn't supposed to happen. He had only meant to reach a sick woman and her child, but now he was trapped out of place and vulnerable in a way that terrified him. The tallest of the men approached, rapping his knuckles against the driver's side window. Jonathan could see the reflection of his own fear in the man's eyes. He fumbled for his phone, considering calling 911, but before he could dial, another car rolled up behind him with squealing brakes. A woman in plain clothes stepped out flashing a badge. "Chicago PD," she shouted, voice ringing with authority. The men paused. She approached swiftly, her presence commanding enough to make them back off, muttering curses under their breath as they melted into the shadows. She turned to Jonathan, eyes sharp and assessing. "Sir, are you all right?" He nodded stiffly, breathing hard. I think so." "I'm Detective Lisa Morales," she said, extending a hand through his window. "You don't look like you belong here. What are you doing in Englewood alone?" Jonathan hesitated. How could he explain that he was here because of a phone call from a child he'd never met, that he was chasing a promise he hadn't planned on making? He swallowed. "I'm looking for Clara Jenkins. She's one of my employees. She's sick." Detective Morales' expression softened just slightly. "Clara lives around the corner," she said quietly, "but this is not a safe place to be alone. Follow me." She led him through a labyrinth of narrow streets until they reached a weathered brick apartment building with faded green shutters. The stairs up to the second floor were crooked and worn, smelling of stale coffee and damp wood. Jonathan had to fight back a wave of nausea at the sudden realization of how different this place was from everything he knew. He glanced at Detective Morales, who gave him an encouraging nod before stepping aside. He climbed the final steps alone, each creaking tread echoing like a drumbeat of his growing dread. At the door, marked 2B, he paused. His reflection in the tarnished peephole showed a man far older and more uncertain than the one who had left the hospital just an hour earlier. He raised his hand to knock, but his fingers hovered in the air, trembling. He remembered the words Ella had whispered on the phone, so small, yet so devastating. He thought of his mother of nights spent watching her fight exhaustion, praying she wouldn't collapse. It all came flooding back the memories he'd buried under years of ambition. A sudden clarity washed over him. This was not a detour from his life. It was a confrontation with everything he had tried to forget. He knocked softly. There was no immediate response, only the muffled sound of a TV playing cartoons somewhere inside. He raised his hand again, this time knocking louder. The door creaked open a few inches, and he saw a single blue eye peeking out Ella's eye, the same eye that had haunted him since the phone call. "Mr. Blake?" she asked timidly, her voice barely a whisper. He knelt so he could see her fully, his heart breaking at how small she looked, wearing a shirt several sizes too big, hair matted to her forehead. "Hi, Ella," he said softly. "I told you I'd come." Her lip quivered. "Mommy's not getting better," she whispered. The quiet desperation in her words pierced him deeper than he thought possible. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small stuffed bunny he'd grabbed impulsively from a convenience store on his way there. "I brought you a friend," he said, holding it out. Her eyes widened as she took it, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline. Jonathan knew in that moment that this was more than a sick day or a missed shift. It was a window into a world that existed just outside the borders of his carefully controlled life. A world where people fell through the cracks, where children bore burdens far too big for their tiny shoulders. He understood now that true leadership wasn't about spreadsheets and balance sheets. It was about showing up when it mattered most, about seeing the people behind the numbers. As Ella stepped aside to let him in, he took a deep breath, bracing himself for what he would find inside the dimly lit apartment. This was no longer about a call or an employee. It was about a promise he couldn't turn his back on a life that demanded he leave his comfort zone behind forever. The apartment was dark and stifling, the air thick with the scent of menthol ointment and stale bread. Jonathan stepped inside, slowly, eyes adjusting to the gloom as the door clicked shut behind him. The living room was small but tidy toys lined up carefully along the wall, dishes stacked neatly in the sink, despite the signs of neglect. It was clear someone had tried desperately to keep things together, even as everything fell apart. He felt a pang of respect and sorrow all at once. In the corner of the room, propped up on a sagging couch, lay Clara Jenkins. She looked even more fragile than he had imagined. Her skin was pale, her hair clinging to her forehead in damp strands. Her eyes fluttered open when she sensed movement, and when they focused on Jonathan, a flicker of confusion and fear crossed her face. "Mr. Blake," she rasped, her voice hoarse, barely audible. I didn't expect you to come." He knelt beside her gently, placing his hand on hers. Her fingers were ice-cold, trembling with the effort of simply holding them steady. He studied her gaunt face, the deep lines etched by pain and exhaustion. This was the face of someone who had given everything for survival. Someone who had hidden her suffering so well that it had nearly killed her. "You don't have to talk," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. He could no longer hide. "I'm here now. I'll make sure you get help." Clara shook her head weakly, tears spilling from the corners of her eyes. "I didn't want to cause trouble," she whispered. "I thought if I could rest a few days, I'd be able to go back. I didn't want to lose the job. I didn't want Ella to lose our home." Jonathan felt his chest tighten painfully. How many times had he issued orders from his glass office, never imagining the real lives those decisions affected? How many people like Clara had he failed to see, believing they were just faceless cogs in the grand machine he was so proud of running? Ella hovered nearby, clutching the stuffed bunny he'd given her, her wide eyes darting between her mother and Jonathan. Her expression was a mixture of hope and terror, like she was waiting for him to say something that could save them both. He reached out his hand to her, and she hesitated only a moment before slipping her tiny fingers into his. A sudden cough racked Clara's body, violent and unrelenting. Jonathan reacted on instinct, easing her upright, supporting her as she struggled to breathe. He could feel the thinness of her frame, the heat radiating from her feverish skin. He glanced around the apartment, realizing there was no medication in sight, no sign of recent medical care. He pulled his phone from his pocket and called his personal physician, voice urgent and low. "Dr. Patel, I need you at this address now. Bring everything you might need." He ended the call and looked into Clara's eyes, which were wet with tears and wide with disbelief. "You don't have to fight this alone anymore," he said firmly, voice shaking with conviction. Clara sobbed quietly, turning her head toward the ceiling as though ashamed of her tears. Why, she gasped, "Why are you doing this? I'm just a janitor." Jonathan shook his head slowly, eyes burning. "No, Clara, you're a mother. You're a person. That's enough. That's everything." He guided her back against the pillows, brushing damp hair from her forehead with surprising tenderness. Ella climbed up beside her mother, curling into the crook of her arm. Seeing them together, so vulnerable and yet so determined to hold on to each other, pierced Jonathan deeper than any boardroom betrayal or corporate crisis ever had. As they waited for the doctor, he took in every detail: the faded family photo on the wall, the pile of unopened mail stacked on the table, the school drawings labeled "Mommy and Me" in wobbly crayon letters. It was a home held together by love and sheer willpower, and yet so close to crumbling. He understood then that leadership wasn't about control or perfection. It was about compassion, about having the courage to show up for people when it counted most. The lesson struck him with humbling force. True power wasn't measured by the number of people you commanded, but by how many lives you could lift up when they needed you most. Dr. Patel arrived quickly, setting down a black medical bag and getting to work. Jonathan stepped aside but stayed close, refusing to leave Clara and Ella alone again. As Dr. Patel examined Clara, he explained the severity of her pneumonia, the need for medication rest, and proper nutrition. Jonathan nodded grimly, already making mental notes of what needed to be done. Throughout it all, Ella kept one small hand on her mother's arm, eyes wide and glistening. Every time Clara coughed, Ella flinched like the sound was a physical blow. Jonathan reached for her hand again, and when she looked up at him, he saw not just fear, but a flicker of trust, fragile but real. He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm here now," he whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." He watched Dr. Patel administer medication and instruct Clara to breathe slowly, counting each breath with painstaking patience. The room was quiet except for the rasp of Clara's breathing and the steady beat of Ella's nervous foot tapping the floor. The silence was not empty, but filled with the weight of their struggle, and Jonathan's silent vow that he would see it through. As the worst of the coughing subsided and Clara drifted into an exhausted sleep, Jonathan pulled up a chair, settling in for the night. He knew then that his life had changed forever, that he would never again measure success by the neatness of his schedule or the size of his bonuses. The world he had built for himself felt so small now compared to the enormity of the need he saw in this dim apartment. And so, he sat there, one hand resting on the couch where Clara and Ella lay, ready to face whatever came next, with a heart wide open. Word of Jonathan's unexpected visit to Englewood spread quickly. By the next morning, headlines splashed across local news: millionaire hospital CEO seen in Southside slum, hero or fool rumors swirled among hospital staff and donors alike, each adding a new layer of suspicion or admiration. For some, Jonathan's actions were proof of a compassionate heart. For others, they were a dangerous sign that he had lost his grip on what mattered: the business. No one felt the tension more than Jonathan himself. He returned to St. Jude Medical Center that morning. Dark circles beneath his eyes, the memory of Clara's labored breathing and Ella's trembling hand etched into every thought. His phone buzzed constantly. Board members demanding explanations, his PR team urging him to release a carefully worded statement, donors threatening to pull funding if he didn't clarify his priorities. Each new message felt like a hammer pounding against his resolve. As he stepped into his office, the air felt colder than ever. Waiting for him by the window was CFO Ethan Crowley, his expression grim. Without preamble, Ethan held up a tablet displaying headlines from financial news outlets. "This," he said sharply, "is a crisis of your own making." Jonathan took the device, scanning stories that questioned his leadership, speculated about personal scandals, and warned of plummeting investor confidence. The words blurred as he remembered Ella's voice, the raw honesty of her fear, the quiet dignity of Clara's struggle. "You've humiliated this hospital," Ethan continued, his voice rising with each word. "Your job is to protect its reputation, not play savior in the slums. If you don't release a statement distancing yourself from this charity case, we'll have no choice but to ask for your resignation." Jonathan felt his heart pound with an anger he hadn't known he was capable of. How had compassion become something to hide? When had caring for the people who worked for him become a liability instead of a duty? He placed the tablet gently on his desk and looked up at Ethan with eyes that burned, not with fear, but with certainty. "I'm not releasing any statement," he said quietly but firmly. "And if you want my resignation, you'll have it." Ethan's mouth fell open, stunned. Jonathan reached for his briefcase and began pulling out files one by one. "These are the accounts I've personally overseen. They're up to date. I'll sign whatever paperwork is necessary." He paused, meeting Ethan's eyes. "But understand this. I'm not ashamed of what I did. I'm proud of it." As he walked out of his office, a hush fell over the executive floor. Assistants peeked out from behind cubicles, colleagues whispered, but Jonathan's steps were steady. With every stride he felt lighter. He was no longer bound by the rigid expectations of a role that had demanded he close his eyes to the suffering around him. He drove back to Englewood alone, feeling the weight of the past decades lift with every mile. He stopped at a grocery store on the way, filling bags with fresh fruit bread and medicine. As he climbed the crooked stairs to Clara's apartment, he felt the kind of anticipation he hadn't known since he was a child, hoping for a miracle. Inside, Clara looked stronger than before, color slowly returning to her cheeks as Dr. Patel's treatments took effect. Ella greeted him with a shy smile that made his heart ache and swell all at once. She wore the same oversized shirt, but now she looked at him with an openness that told him she believed he wasn't just another adult who would vanish when things got hard. As he unpacked the groceries, Clara's eyes filled with tears. She struggled to sit up straighter. "Mr. Blake, you don't have to keep doing this. You've already done more than I could ever thank you for." He shook his head softly. "I'm not here because I feel obligated, Clara. I'm here because I want to be, because no one should have to go through what you and Ella have endured alone." A tear slipped down her cheek, and Ella climbed onto the couch, pressing close to her mother, as if to shield her from the world. Jonathan took a seat across from them, his voice low but unwavering. "I've stepped down from my position at St. Jude. I plan to start a foundation Ella's promised to help children whose parents are too sick or too poor to fight alone." Ella's eyes widened with wonder. "You're really going to help other kids like me?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. He nodded, and a quiet, determined joy filled his chest. "Yes, sweetheart, because you showed me what truly matters." The room fell silent, but it was a peaceful silence rich with unspoken gratitude and the fragile beginning of hope. For the first time in decades, Jonathan no longer felt alone. He had traded power for purpose, distance for connection, and in doing so he had found the kind of wealth that couldn't be counted in dollars or prestige. The lesson was clear: power built on fear and control is brittle, destined to shatter. But compassion, genuine, stubborn compassion, creates bonds strong enough to carry people through their darkest nights. As the late afternoon light slanted through the grimy window, Jonathan knew he had made the right choice. He belonged here with these two souls who had reminded him what it meant to be human. Jonathan Blake's journey began as a routine morning, shaped by cold precision and unyielding ambition, a day no different from the thousands he had spent enforcing order from his towering office. But one unexpected call, answered by a fragile voice, tore down every wall he had built around himself. From the sterile hallways of St. Jude Medical Center to the cracked sidewalks of Englewood, he crossed a chasm between the world he controlled and the world he never dared to see. He witnessed Clara Jenkins' quiet struggle to keep going for the sake of her daughter Ella, who in her innocence offered to clean floors so they wouldn't lose their home. He found himself face to face with a kind of raw, desperate bravery that no spreadsheet could measure and no balance sheet could value. In the suffocating gloom of Clara's apartment, Jonathan learned what it truly meant to care not from a safe distance, not as an abstract sense of duty, but by showing up, listening, and choosing to stand by those who needed him most. When his board demanded he sacrifice compassion for reputation, he made the hardest choice of his life, walking away from power to hold on to his newfound purpose. His decision to resign and start a foundation was more than an act of charity. It was a commitment to the belief that no child should carry the weight of adult struggles alone, and no family should have to suffer unseen in the shadows of society. This story teaches us that real strength is not in how high we climb, but in how willing we are to reach back and lift others up. Compassion often asks us to step into uncomfortable places, to question our priorities, and to risk what we've built to do what's right. It shows us the power of patience because lasting change doesn't happen overnight. It grows quietly in every small kind act we choose to make. It reminds us that while we may not be able to fix everything, we can change the world for someone simply by caring enough to show up. In our own lives, let's remember Jonathan's lesson. Don't let fear of losing status or comfort keep you from helping someone in need. Choose to see people for who they are, not just what they produce. Listen without judgment, offer a hand when you can, and believe that your compassion can ripple outward in ways you might never see. If you found this story moving and want to hear more tales that touch the heart, please subscribe to our channel. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support gives us the motivation to keep bringing you meaningful stories that inspire hope and kindness. Thank you so much for watching.